Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining ENFASYS webinar. As it is now 3:02, I suggest that we slowly start, as some of you may still join in the upcoming minutes. This first part, it's only going to be an introduction about the project. Let's start with, first of all, the title of the webinar of today. I want to remind you that today is our 6th webinar, which means that we have other 5 webinars that are available on our website and that we suggest you to go and watch if you're interested in those topics. Today's topic is beyond the status quo, co-designing policy mixes to foster the transformation towards sustainable agri-food systems. A captivating title, and today you will understand more what our project did in this direction. Who is here today to present? Well, there are my colleagues from the Association of Balkan Innovation, 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀 and 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀. I am Davide Guariento. We have the colleagues from the Humboldt-University from Berlin. We have Peter Findt, Pascal 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀, Laurent Birner, and Elisabeth Stumvoll. And we have a colleague from 𝘄𝗲𝗯𝗶H, Niall Hammond, and a colleague from IDELA, Amandine Menet. Peter, could you go, please? Thank you very much. The agenda for today, you may have already seen it. A short welcome and setting the scene and presentation about the project. Then we will move forward to the policy co-design for the sustainability transformation of agri-food systems. Then we will provide you with case study insights, so case study presentations, policy co-design processes in practice from our case study in France, so developing protein autonomy in French dairy farms. The one from the Brandenburg region, building regional value chains in Brandenburg pig production, and the one in Ireland, growing the organic dairy sector in Ireland. Then we have a short part on the synthesis and the reflection, and we will also have about 15 minutes for the audience interaction, and we will open a Q&A session. Finally, we will wrap up and let you know about the next steps. A short introduction to the ENFASYS project. The project starting date was the 1st of September 2022, so we are a very mature project. We are actually close to the end of the project that is going to be next year in August. The project duration is 48 months. It is coordinated by Avilvo, a research institute in the Flanders, and the budget for the project is 4.5 million euros. There are many goals of this project, as it is a very complex project. Here we have summarized only a few of them. The project is definitely supporting the Green Deal, in particular the Farm to Fork ambitions. The project stimulates a just and robust transition to sustainable, productive, climate-neutral, biodiversity-friendly, and resilient farming systems. It strengthened the public strategies, policies, and the private strategies, business models, and social innovations that encourage farmers to change their production systems. Today, we will mostly focus indeed in this aspect of policies. It tries to overcome and to study the multiple kinks in current food systems that prevent farmers from moving to sustainable farming systems. Here you can see the partners of the project. As I said, ILVO is the coordinator. We have 𝘁𝗲𝗯𝗶𝗀, the Association of Balkan Innovation that I'm representing, GAIA from Greece, MBS from France, NIBIO from Norway, UC Louvain from Belgium, IDELA from France, 𝘄𝗲𝗯𝗶𝗀 from 𝘄𝗲𝗯𝗶𝗀, and we have the University of Bologna from Italy, Humboldt-University, and FIBOL from Switzerland. Thank you for your attention, and now I will give the floor to Peter.
Yes, thank you very much. I will briefly introduce you to the idea of policy co-design for the sustainability transformation of agri-food systems. We start with the diagnosis that the current status quo of Europe's agri-food system is unsustainable. These systems face very urgent and often still unsolved sustainability challenges. And this, although we had several decades of policy reforms which had a sustainability level. However, these policy reforms have not created and implemented policies that would really help Europe's agri-food system to face the many sustainability challenges. Why is this the case? We have a legacy of what we call agricultural exceptionalism. That's the idea that the agricultural sector is different from others, that policy should focus on the increase of productivity and the needs of producers, and should in particular try to increase farm income. And thereby other effects have been treated as side effects and were neglected, in particular effects on the environment, rural areas, and the question of climate change emissions. So the sustainability concerns like biodiversity, climate, or resource efficiency were not completely ignored, and they were at the level of programs and goals integrated into the common agriculture policy by layering new ideas and new instruments on top of the old instruments, which had this productivist policy core to support producers and increase producer income. So by layering these new ideas around sustainability on top of the old ones, basically the old policy core was defended and maintained. The outcome is a very complex policy mix, or a different policy mix in each of the 27 member states, with some new elements, but the overall effectiveness to improve the sustainability of agri-food systems has been very limited according to a number of studies. So it is against this background that a number of voices have been calling for policy co-design. The starting point is the diagnosis that we have seen policy failure. The national strategy CAP plans do not in any systematic way address the systemic barriers to more sustainable farming practices. We have lots of complaints about very limited opportunities for stakeholder participation. We hear that from farm interest organizations, but also from civil society organizations. And the overall impression is that there is a very administration-centered style of national implementation of the common agriculture policy. And this administration-centered way of policy making is then blamed for the path dependency of the policy designs, which really follow old designs with a little bit variation, and that these policies are becoming more and more bureaucratic over time, and they do not address the transformation needs of the affected groups, farmers, and others along the value chain. Now, the assumption is that more bottom-up involvement of farmers and other stakeholders in policy formulation can indeed facilitate the development of coherent policy mixes, which will then address the systemic barriers to the needed change. The approach in ENFASYS is that we want to test this assumption. So we have started co-design processes to develop policy mixes for more sustainable agri-food systems in 10 case studies across Europe. And we also want to assess whether these policy mixes, which are then developed, are potentially effective to address the sustainability challenges. So what do we mean by an effective design of policy mixes? Well, that relies on the careful construction of a policy. And a policy mix has 3 different layers. First of all, the objectives. They express the underlying beliefs and goals. For example, the policy should increase farm income and productivity, or it should help to enhance biodiversity. The second layer are the instruments. These are the tools which are used to achieve these objectives. For example, subsidies, regulations, or support for farm advice. And finally, we need to look at the calibrations. This is the fine-tuning of the instruments to the specific context. So what are the conditions to receive a subsidy? What will be the payment amount? Who is entitled? These are the calibrations that finally decide how these tools are actually going to work in practice. And if we then ask, okay, what makes up an effective policy design, we have to distinguish between three criteria. First of all, we want that the goals are coherent. That means that the goals support each other and are not contradictory. Second, we want that the instruments are consistent. That means that the instruments support each other in their operation and are not kind of mutually neutralizing their effects. And finally, we're looking for congruence of instruments and goals, and this means that the instruments actually do address the goals that are stated in the policy and are not pursuing other purposes. So policy co-design is then a process that is rooted in design thinking. And the starting point here is that those who are affected by a policy should be involved in the formulation of this policy. There is a potential of collaborative and participatory processes to address complex public problems, and the expected benefits are manifold. We expect more legitimacy of the policy, better practical feasibility, more innovation, and more trust by involving a diversity of stakeholders and their different and fresh ideas. So this might then, if it all works out, help to overcome the lock-ins in our agri-food systems by introducing new ideas and perspectives. But so far, design thinking and co-design has received little attention for policymaking in the agri-food sector. So how did we actually do this? We worked with a series of co-design workshops. The background was a participatory system analysis of each farming system in each of the case studies, with causal loop diagrams and value actor networks. So those created very complex maps, how the system currently looks like and where the lock-ins and the barriers to change are. The reference for our policy design was the previously co-designed sustainable business model. And we then asked our participants which policies would be needed to enable this more sustainable business model. We've done this because otherwise it would have been too complex for a series of workshops with altogether 9 or 10 hours of interaction. So the first step is that with the participants, we identified different types of barriers and lock-ins at various elements, various locations in the system. We then formulated SMART objectives. SMART means they are specific, measurable, realistic, and timed. And these objectives are based on the barriers and lock-ins. So our objectives address the barriers to change that we've identified in the first step. We then selected instruments, or first collected instruments and then prioritized them, which would be able to help us to achieve the objectives. And in the end, we calibrated the instruments in a way that the instruments are coherent with the objectives and overall give a good balance between the different objectives and a balanced policy mix. So this co-design process was carried out in the 10 ENFASYS case studies. Altogether in the project, we conducted 20 workshops in 9 different countries with a total workshop duration of 57 hours. On top of that, we conducted 16 one-on-one interviews to involve more people who, for various reasons, could not participate in the workshop. We also used surveys to gather additional information about the policy mixes and its assessment. And overall, we interacted with 69 different agri-food stakeholders across the case studies. In practice, this looked like this. Here you can see that we used a range of different methods and tools. So we used online workshops, Mentimeter questions for workshops which took place on location. We used classical meta plan style maps and cards on walls, and we used interactive elements in Zoom, like the survey that you can see on the bottom left. So today we want to present the outcome of 3 of our case studies, and we focus on 3 cases with animal production. The reason is that animal production is attributed to more than 50% of value added in EU agriculture. However, the transformation needs here are particularly urgent. Animal production contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. There is a lot of land required to produce the feedstuffs for the animals, so this has implications for land use and creates pressure for other land uses, and therefore has effects, for example, on biodiversity and habitat protection. Animal production is linked to nitrate emissions, and there are various public health risks like zoonosis or antimicrobial resistance. And of course, there's the big debate about the welfare of the production animals. At the same time, the sector conveys a lot of structural lock-ins, an accumulation of barriers to change towards more sustainable and animal-friendly system. In particular, the investments needed to improve animal welfare are extremely high. So farmers who would go into that direction face very long payback periods. And then they ask themselves, okay, how stable will be the market environment and the policy environment if I have to pay off my loan for 20 or 30 years? The producers also operate in highly competitive international markets. There is often limited willingness to pay by consumers for products with higher sustainability and animal welfare standards. And the risks of investments in more sustainability or animal welfare are distributed in a very uneven way along the value chain. Usually, most of the risks fall onto the farmers, and other actors along the value chain can just change their strategies if they learn it doesn't work out, or if they just change their priorities after a few years. So we are now looking forward to hear from the 3 case study presentations how our participants develop policy mixes that could address these lock-ins and barriers. And I'm very pleased to welcome Amandine Menet, who will present the first case study about protein self-sufficiency in French dairy farms. Amandine, over to you.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. So I will present to you our case study about protein self-sufficiency in French dairy farms. So our transformation goal is to reach protein autonomy for dairy cow feed. Now, in France, we import around 3 tons of soy per year. Almost half of it is eaten by cattle, mainly dairy cows. And on average, in dairy farms, protein autonomy is around 70%. So the idea is to have more self-sufficient farms buying protein from France or Europe and less imported soy from South America mostly, or farms producing their own protein and where feed is mostly based on grassland and protein-rich forage. There are different challenges. About the environmental aspect, the idea is to limit deforestation and imports. Regarding the economic aspects, we want to develop more resilient farms that are less exposed to market volatility. And we also have a social aspect with the idea to revitalize local areas and create new sectors and jobs. But we identify different barriers. First of all, there is a fear of change and risk-taking among farmers, but also among advisors. Another point is the performance of self-sufficient systems. It's more technical, it requires more work at the beginning, the yields are not as good as other crops. Adding to that, a lack of research into protein crops variety, leading to a lack of choice and limiting adaptation to specific context. And there's also a lack of processing and storage facilities to produce feed from local protein crops. There are few organized sectors to transform crops like alfalfa, rapeseed, soy, and it demands consequent investments if we want to step up. The competitiveness of self-sufficient systems is also a barrier. It's not obvious when you compare these systems to more classical systems with soy. And finally, there is no real consumer demands around this. So with the stakeholders, we co-designed the policy mix. So we identify 6 major aims. And we also identify the tools to reach those aims. So the first idea is to increase the proportion of grass and protein-rich forage. To do that, we can develop coupled aid for the production of protein-rich crops. We also have decoupled aid for grass. We also want to set in place more ambitious transition ICM, and we want to develop operational programs for collected protein crops. We also want to encourage the introduction of proteins into crop rotation and increase protein in all-seed area of yields. We also do this through CAP's aid, and also important tools is the development of truly effective mirror measures, but it's not really easy to set in place. And we also have some national tools like 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀 proteins. Another aims is to develop industrial collection and processing facilities, thanks to the development of standard contracts between plant farmers and breeders. We have another aims about the support of research into animal varieties and genetics through a national and European genetic and varietal research program. And a big aim is to provide financial, technical, and human supports to farmers to help them innovate and take risks, thanks to support for organic farming, because both topics are linked. And we also imagine a training, advice, check, subsidies to help farmers to take risk. We also identify another aims, but we cannot reach it through policy tools. So what is needed from the EU is a support through the CAP budget, but also market development support through quality levels, support of processing units, and consumer communication. We also need truly effective mirror clauses and support other related issues and for project training and research about the topics. And another important thing is to set incentive for change, to support farmers who take risks. So the key takeaways: there are various types of obstacles, social, economic, technical, at various levels among the stakeholders. But we also have various policy tools in place or to be set, but with different degrees of impact and feasibility. For example, truly effective mirror clauses could have a big impact, but it's not really feasible actually. There is also a possibility of linking the topic to others as part of broader support mechanisms. So linked it to organic farming or environment and things like that. But we need to communicate and share more effectively with influential stakeholders. And we need to have a more comprehensive reflection about the change support. That's it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Amandine. We now jump to the region of Brandenburg in Germany, and Elisabeth Stumpfohl will present us the results from that area. Elisabeth, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Let me introduce our case study, which is about the sustainable transformation of the conventional pig farming value chain in Brandenburg in Germany. Let's jump right into the transformation challenge, or where we are right now. There's a declining pig sector in Brandenburg with pretty high investment costs. So it's pretty costly to renovate and modernize infrastructure, as we've heard. And even after investment, often the returns remain fairly low. And at the same time, of course, there is societal demand for having higher animal welfare and for having a regional production and regional value chain. So the goals of the case study work that we're looking into is for Brandenburg to become a model region for animal-friendly sustainable and economically viable pig farming, and how the vision is to create a regional value chain that is built on cooperation, on fair prices, all of this under a credible and transparent quality label that is trusted by consumers, and also having integrated circular models, promoting sustainable entrepreneurship in the region, and ultimately gaining this higher willingness to pay. And a couple of business models have also been discussed, such as, for example, having the straw pigs from Brandenburg positioned as a high quality and regional specialty product. So our stakeholders have also come up with this co-designed policy mix that we've already touched on. We have the goals in the top, and then the orange are the policy instruments. The first goal that or that they looked into is all animals in higher husbandry levels. So here having regulatory law that is more realistic, longer, and also maybe with longer transition periods. Then a lot of investment support. Farmers need targeted financial aid for investment and also for all the running and operational costs that they have. And then a big focus is that they seek more funding for strategic alliances, so cooperatives or producer alliances. Second goal is the higher level of animal health. Here, farmers would really like to monitor and evaluate animal health themselves on their own farm. That's the first instrument. Again, receive more investment support for getting more space for pigs, better air quality, hygiene, bedding, again, running costs here. The third goal is the preservation of the entire value chain, so keeping all stages of pig production within the region. And this can be achieved via upgrading the regional slaughterhouses, for example, and all the processing facilities. And this final instrument here is the labeling. So labeling allows regional producers with the higher welfare standards to then differentiate their products from others. A fourth goal is closing the nutrient cycle, so pig farming really becoming part of the sustainable circular economy. And here an instrument would be support for all the model projects that already exist and have circular economy approaches. A final goal is more on the EU level, so anchoring animal welfare at the EU level, supporting it through trade policy. So the first one is really regulating that market access, introducing more stricter import requirements, but also harmonizing and raising the minimum welfare, animal welfare levels at the EU level, so across all member states. And a more investment support, and then finally also having that coherent labeling matrix, labeling system for all the non-EU imported meat as well. So this is our design. We also brought a few needs from the EU, especially some quotes from stakeholders. So here's 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀, who says that he expects European policymakers to provide that planning security and have those adequate transition periods for regulatory changes, to reduce bureaucracy, and also particularly in approval and the permitting procedures, and to deliver clearer guidance on that trade-off between animal welfare and environmental protection. We brought another voice from the Albert-Schweitzer Foundation, from 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀, who said that we need uniform minimum standards for livestock farming across the EU to ensure fairer competition and planning security. And in the medium term, there should be a mandatory animal welfare label for meat and dairy products throughout the EU. Finally, some key takeaways. In terms of the transformative ambition of our policy mix, participants agreed on objectives that we need to combine the higher levels of animal welfare and animal health with having a more regional production and that closed material cycle. The instruments that they choose, so first one was the regulatory instrument to really kind of eliminate the more unsustainable competition from the market, so that comes into the market. Lots of financial instruments to really incentivize the sustainable investments and then compensate the producers for all the money that they're spending. Informational instruments are also important to increase transparency of the EU and then the non-EU competitors. And something that was key was the support for model projects and that development of regional value chains. In terms of the feasibility of our policy mix, well, that always depends on policy decisions, both at the national and the EU level. And of course, having sufficient budgets to support all of these activities. And something that was also key is that we need to gain a shared vision of an animal-friendly future of the livestock sector in the EU. And finally, success always depends also on all these entrepreneurial activities that are going on, but also on maintaining the infrastructure, especially for our case, the processing infrastructure, slaughterhouses in the region. And we have a focus on a more credible and this regional label to increase the consumer willingness to pay in the region. Finally, this is also part of our project. We need to integrate also the co-design sustainable business models with the policy development, so those go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. And now we travel to Ireland, and Niall Hammond from 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀 will tell us about the results of the policy co-design with a view to growing the organic dairy sector in Ireland. Niall, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. So I'll just give a quick overview of where organic stands now and the kinds of supports that are needed to help us move things forward. So to start with a bit of background, under Ireland's Climate Action Plan, we've set a target that 10% of our agricultural land should be farmed organically by 2030. We've actually made good progress. Back in 2020, it was just 1.6%, and now it's up to around 5.6%. So most of the organic farmers, around 85%, are in beef and sheep farming. However, when we look at dairy, the numbers are actually quite small. There's only about 2% of organic farmers are milking cows. So that tells us something important, that organic farming is growing overall. However, there's still strong barriers stopping dairy farmers from making the switch. The first issue is really the business case. Conventional dairy is doing very well in Ireland. Last year, the average farm income was around €150,000. So while organic milk prices are higher than conventional, often this is not enough to make up for the drop in output when you reduce herd size to meet organic standards. There's support through the organic farming scheme, but it usually doesn't close that income gap. Then there's kind of an infrastructure problem. Organic feed is expensive and can be hard to source. So Ireland doesn't yet have an organic feed mill. So this adds an extra cost and hassle for farmers who have converted. And then on the processing side, there are no dedicated organic dairy facilities for value-added products like butter or baby formula. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation where you have processors won't invest without supply and farmers won't convert without somewhere to send their milk. Then we also found these, sorry, just go back one sec, Peter. Then we also found these kind of knowledge and confidence barriers. So many farmers are understandably nervous about farming without artificial fertilizers. So the conventional system has like a long proven track record that farmers really trust. But we don't really have a large number of organic dairy demonstration farms to show what success can look like in the organic system. And then the final one is that even if a farmer is ready and willing to convert to organic, their location can be a deal breaker. So a processor might be unwilling to collect from an isolated farmer because it costs them too much to get to that area. So while conversion decisions happen at the farm level, these challenges are really part of a much bigger system that needs to work together. So looking at the policy mix for our case study, the main focus was on the technical and financial supports, especially through the organic farming scheme. So that scheme has been key to progress overall. But again, the payments within the scheme just aren't enough to make dairy conversion attractive to a lot of farmers. So stakeholders also talked about the potential of younger farmers. When someone's taking over a farm, they're already thinking about long-term plans. So it can be an ideal moment to get them to consider going organic. We also found that like once a farmer makes that switch, we've seen that the dropout rates are very low. So there's a strong long-term payoff if you can get a young farmer into the organic system. Then the other goals we looked at very briefly were just like building stronger processing network, expanding the market for organic dairy, and setting up Irish organic dairy trials to give farmers more confidence in what's possible. So next, so what do we actually need to make organic dairy more viable? First, we need greater transparency in the pricing along the supply chain, so farmers can clearly see whether the organic premium is really reaching them. Second, we need new financing models to help develop the organic processing facilities, particularly for those value-added products like butter or baby formula. Third, organic dairy co-ops could make a big difference. This would help farmers to kind of pool their resources, buy feed more affordably, and even coordinate conversions so that you don't have that issue with a farmer being isolated and have no one to sell their milk to. And finally, we need a sector-specific market research and consumer awareness campaign to show that there's real demand for organic dairy and to build confidence throughout the whole supply chain. So the key takeaways, at the end of the day, dairy farming is a business, and if the numbers don't stack up, it's unlikely you're going to have a significant number of farmers willing to convert. Most of our policy instruments in the mix focused on CAP instruments. It's because these generally work well in other areas, but need to be tailored more carefully for the dairy sector. One interesting question that was was whether our organic targets should reflect the types of farms we have, not just the land area. So, because while Ireland may well hit its overall target, it could be without many dairy farmers converting at all. And if that's the case, there's kind of little incentive to tailor dairy-specific interventions. So this risks leaving a key part of the farming sector behind. So thanks for listening. I'll pass you back to Peter.
Great. Thank you very much, Niall. Just to wrap this up, we have thought a little bit about the takeaways, learnings from across the case studies. And these are a few key points that we want to mention. First of all, the co-designed policy mixes in the case studies often reflect rather incremental change. Stepwise movements towards a more sustainable, more animal-friendly sector. And this probably reflects the orientation of our participants who look more for improvement of the current system than moving to a completely different system. The policy objectives focus primarily on producer needs. So they continue with the productivist paradigm of agricultural policymaking, which puts the needs of producers very much at the center. So that's being reproduced with the participants that we had in our case studies. It could be a good thing or not such a good thing, but it needs to be observed. There's often a focus on financial instruments to address economic barriers. And to implement these policy mixes, we would need much larger budgets. So the question is how feasible that is going to be in the current budgetary, financial, and political environment of Europe in the mid-2020s. There is also a lot of focus on advisory services and training to address knowledge-related barriers. But what's not so much addressed is that the goals also of more transformation-oriented science are often contested by farmers with their current business models. So there is a question whether the intended recipients of this advice will be very happy to receive this transformation knowledge. It might not match up very well with their personal objectives and understanding of the situation. And finally, there are a number of structural lock-ins like sunk investments or limited consumers' willingness to pay, but also infrastructure bottlenecks, which are very hard to address through policy mixes unless you've got a kind of long-term commitment by policymakers, which then is often in tension with the 4 or 5 year budgetary cycles of parliamentary democratic systems. If we reflect on the methodologies, we could say, well, this is a very deliberative approach. So we bring people together to think together about possible change strategies for a sector in trouble. And that was highly appreciated by the participants, in particular this quasi-experimental setting. We were kind of playing policymakers without the pressure to, in the end, come up with a policy mix in a certain timeline, in a very tight political process. The results are, of course, very sensitive to the composition of the participants and also to the moderator approach. In our case studies, we mostly had a very results-oriented and pre-structured process, because we only have those 9 hours per case study to produce very complex and difficult outcomes. But our participants played along and said they enjoyed the process. The experimental setting also implies that the participants are relieved from an immediate need for policy action, and that creates a space for shared reasoning. So people are less strategic, because they don't have to consider, if I make this concession with an argument, what would be the implication for the interests of the group that I'm going to represent. So we had more space for open thinking and thinking out of the box. Overall, the methodological setting consists of very collaborative, inclusive, and transparent procedures, and this ensures a certain degree of reflexivity of the outcomes, but it also requires the participants to engage in joint reasoning. So participants who just want to shout out how bad everything is would definitely not enjoy this methodology. You need to be constructive, and you need to be willing to engage with arguments and insights from other people with whom you might not fully agree. So what type of results does this produce? We understand the results as a kind of reference position for public debate and to guide policymakers, because it has been produced under relatively reasonable and transparent conditions. Of course, we can then criticize, well, have all the relevant stakeholders been involved? Where has been influenced by certain types of information? But that makes us very transparent so that we can criticize and then further develop the outcome. So the idea is to have a reference position with a high degree of reflexivity, reasoning, and inclusiveness to inform the political process. However, does that help us to move beyond the status quo? Well, definitely we could say that the co-design processes helped our participants to formulate coherent design options as a potential reference point for policy formulation in real-world policy processes. The critical process elements are access, who can participate here, transparency, what do we know about how the process was actually conducted, and fair procedures with equal voice for all the affected interests and perspectives. What we still need is an independent assessment of the effectiveness of the proposed policy mixes to actually increase animal welfare and sustainability. That's something that we still need to do. And the uptake of the results will depend on the willingness of incumbent policymakers, but also their capacities to actually design coherent, consistent, congruent policies. So outlook, next step in the project, is then a participatory assessment of this policy space, or what we call the policy design space, where we assess the willingness and the capacity of the incumbent policymakers to actually develop and adopt the kind of transformative policies that were co-designed by our participants. So there is a lot of literature that we have used, and with these reflections, we want to start the audience interaction Q&A, and over to Davide to moderate the next part of this webinar. Thank you very much for everybody's attention.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you all the colleagues for the very interesting presentations. Yes, we can start with your questions. You can either turn on your microphone and your camera to ask a question and raise your hand, or you can post the question on the chat. Both options are fine. So, is there any question from your side? Maybe while you are thinking about your questions, I can also... Yeah, please.
There's a question from Sandra Dost.
Yes, hello. First of all, thank you for these very interesting insights about the methods and also about the projects. I have some questions. First of all, a bit some information about the stakeholders. How did you win them actually? And was it a kind of common group of stakeholders, or did you try to find different stakeholders so it's a bit balanced? That would be the questions on the stakeholders. And another one was also if you thought about maybe also to go further and even involve the consumer, because he could kind of also bring in some aims or needs and open the debate. That just thinking probably.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. I think we give that question directly to the case studies. Niall, do you want to start? How did you recruit your participants?
Yeah, so for the participants, really was just trying to get as many different people across the whole supply chain. So generally we had, I can't remember exactly, I think we had 10 or 12 people at the workshop. But the only group we struggled to get was retail and consumer. Sorry, we didn't directly ask for the public consumer. And it was just a case of interest, I guess, from people, whether they're willing to give time to it. I think like a lot of people when you're organizing workshops in person or online, it's to give you 2-3 hours is difficult. So yeah, we just tried to aim for as diverse of people as we could. In the end, I think it was definitely probably leaned more towards representatives of farmers and producer organizations. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Elisabeth, do you want to continue? How did you recruit your participants in Brandenburg?
Yeah, that's always a good question. We always try to contact people that we've already contacted before in the project. This is a pretty long project with many tasks, and we've had bilateral interviews with even getting the case set up. So we use those contacts, but particularly for this workshop, we've tried to have people who know a little bit about the policy process. And so mostly these were people who work maybe in ministries, but also have kind of the business aspect as well, or who are in producer associations. So this one was more focused on that. Your question with the consumers is very, very important. And this is also a part of the project. We do look, or we have done also surveys on farmer behavior, but also I think planned with consumer behavior. So this is definitely not neglected, but in terms of this policy mix and process, we mostly had people who know the value chain, but also who know policy making. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Amandine, how did you recruit your participants?
A little bit same like the others. So we gather people who work with experts on economics at different level, people who have more European vision, but also who work on the use of the CAP budget in local area. And they also know well the topic. Maybe a weakness of our group is we gather people more experts in dairy farming, and we don't really have people who know more how to transform and cultivate protein crops. And we also lack people like dairy industry and consumers, like you say. So we missed a little bit this part, but that's
Thank
you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is from Ines.
Hi, so can you hear me? Just to confirm?
Yeah, it's okay. It's a bit garbled, but I think we can probably understand.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for the speakers. Very interesting. However, I have 2 questions, the twofold. First of all, I was wondering, like we were talking about having to do a paradigm shift between like productivist to more socio-ecological transitions. And we were talking about the fear of change by different producers. Now, my first question would be like, what methodologies did you use to try to reduce this fear of change and like this like social cultural barrier that we the farmers have? And my second question would be, since we already have to engage in this paradigm shift, why not try to actually not even like still produce dairy or or meat farming, but why not try to do more plant-based solutions? Like there's a project called the Plant for Value that has been started by ETH at the University of Switzerland, also with the World Food System Center, that actually accompanies farmers that have that used to be dairy or meat farmers, and they're trying to accompany them with technology and financial tools to try to create more plant-based. So since we already engage in this like narrative and paradigm shift, why not go the full way? Those are my two full questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Two great questions. Who wants to start? Anyone from the case studies? Yes, Amandine.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the second question, but the first question. So, in our case, the fear of change is a very big barriers, and now we are working with group of farmers, facilitate with advisors to really use the exchange with peers to pass these barriers, this fear of change. The idea is to really go to see what others do, what's work, how they did it, to grow together and say together, okay, it's possible, I can try this in my farm and things like that. To really use the group force to pass this barrier.
Okay, yeah, I will also try to give an answer. First of all, theory of change is something that we do in another work package, where we try to develop theories of change for each of the 10 case studies. And at the moment, the colleagues also try to develop one overarching theory of change at European level. You can imagine that is super complex. And so the policy work package feeds into that broader theory of change, which also builds on a work package on consumer behavior, a work package on behavioral interventions towards farmers, and a work package where we co-design sustainable business models, which we're also feeding a little bit into our work package. So there's a lot more going on here, because when we think about theories of change, we also need to think beyond policy making. Policy making plays an important contribution, but policy making alone will probably not trigger the kind of transformative change that this project is supposed to support. Your second question is extremely important, because it's a question about how do we draw the system boundaries, what do we take for granted. The design of this project was to transform the existing systems. And the question is then, what's the understanding of the stakeholders? So clearly, the understanding of the participants in our 3 case studies was that they wanted to continue to produce animals, but in better ways, in more sustainable ways, with more animal welfare. And then they were thinking about the preconditions and implications of doing that. What you're describing is an even broader change strategy, which would start with a different basic assumption, which is the reduction of animal-produced feed and its replacement by plant-based food. And so it's a different starting point, and you've mentioned projects who are doing that, and it would be very interesting to compare the results. But your comment makes very clear what are the kind of underlying assumptions that and the normativity that our stakeholders in our design bring to the project. Yeah? So that's very much appreciated.
Thank you so much for the answers. Thank you.
So the next question is from Helle Ørsted-Nielsen.
Hello, thank you for a very, very interesting webinar. So I have, as I understand it, you want to look at both policy coherence and then effective policies for sustainable or transformative change. And I'm convinced that you get the coherence part. But if I look at the policy mixes that came out of it, they seem to be, they can sort of support development within niche, but how effective will it be, these types of policy mixes and actually driving, greater transformation? Do you need also more sort of destructive policies, if you get my what I mean by that?
Yes, absolutely. That's a question that we have also discussed in some breadth in the project, where we were discussing, okay, are these are probably not disruptive strategies. These are very incremental strategies. However, if I speak, for example, for the Brandenburg case, I would say if you would seriously and in a stringent way implement the policy mix designed, then you could actually move the sector to much higher levels of animal welfare. Because the idea is that over time, you would outrule lower levels of animal welfare, and you would support the farmers through investment schemes. And then in Germany, there has also been a big report by the so-called Borchardt Commission, or the Competence Network on Animal Welfare, which suggested that you should also pay farmers for the higher ongoing management costs, for higher levels of animal welfare. So that would require a lot of money, but that is something that has been discussed in Germany for at least 5 years, and which was also adopted by our participants. So if you would implement that policy, you would indeed move the entire sector to much higher levels of animal welfare, but it would cost a lot of public money.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the question. Next question, I think, is from 𝘗𝗶𝗀𝗶𝗀.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a webcam, so I can't show my face. But yeah, thanks for these very interesting insights. I have a question regarding the co-design approach. So so for me, the finding that these co-designed policies that you found that they rather reflect incremental change. Plus the fact that regulatory, so top-down instruments were seen as major levers, I think in the Brandenburg case. But so that, yeah, regulatory instruments were seen as a major level. This kind of makes me wonder if co-design policies actually solve the problem, since you find that they lead to incremental change rather. So yeah, it just makes me wonder that it sounds almost like we need stronger top-down interventions, even if they are unpopular. So maybe if you can just reflect on this.
Does any one of the case study presenters want to chime in?
I can talk a tiny bit to that. So yeah, like just for the Irish dairy case, I guess it's a mix between obviously who you have in the room. So a lot of the people in the room are already obviously are experts in dairy and have been part of the system for a while. So I think for them it's a case of more like calibrating what's already there rather than complete transformation, because they have to weigh up the idea of political will to enact any policy recommendations they may have. I think that always weighed heavily, not heavily is the wrong word, but it definitely is something people consider quite heavily when they're thinking about what policies are realistic. So I think when people maybe put forward something that's a bit more transformative, often it kind of gets reined in with the idea of, oh, well, it's very unlikely that we'll get the support to do that. So yeah, that's only speaking from the Irish case, but I'm not sure it was the same in other case studies.
Yeah, I would completely support this more from a broader political science perspective. I mean, if you want to use the significant power of the state to force an entire sector to move into a certain direction, even if there is no business case, you need to legitimate this. And in a democratic system, you need the support by a majority of the electorate. And in an autocratic system, I would be very skeptical, because all the autocratic systems that I've seen finally end up in some sort of kleptocracy. For my friends, everything, for the others, the law. So I think that's probably also not a very good strategy. So therefore, if you intervene in a way that is highly unpopular, because it really interferes with people's property rights or even other civil rights, then you will definitely get a political backlash. And I think that's also what we're currently seeing in the European political system with the rollback of the farm to fork strategy, the Green European Deal. Yeah? So we need, if we think about the sustainability of these transformation strategies, we also need to think about how we maintain the necessary political support. Great, thanks for that question. The next question is from Vladimir. Welcome.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for participating in the very insightful webinar. I have a question regarding the biodiversity or traditional implementation of the let's say nature cycles. How much of these like biodynamic agriculture and all that practices regarding the organic and regenerative practices are used by the case studies. So it will be very much informative to know if there is any of that. And the additional question is, what is they thinking about that? So we are speaking about the sustainable agriculture all the time, but how much of these practices are used in general, and the transfer of knowledge, especially by the science, but not in a specialized way. I mean, in that let's say traditional issues. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Vladimir, for that question. So here we need to go to the case study presenters. Start. Amandine, can you say something about what's the role of regenerative agriculture and similar practices in your case?
It's very links to those kind of practices, because when farmers want to shift the systems to more self-sufficient systems, they must to think more about how the soil works, and how the importance of grasslands, the importance of hedge and trees and things like that. So they need to have a more systemic approach. So it's linked to the implementation of those kind of practice. That's why I said that we can link this topic to organic farming and things like that, for example.
Okay, thank you, Amandine. Elisabeth, what can you say about our Brandenburg pig case?
Yeah, so in our case, there are a couple of people who are already starting to really only produce in the region and kind of try and have these nutrient recycling. So really using things like manure from pigs to then feed back into the system for the feed. So these things definitely are also happening. And this is kind of our entrepreneur who's focusing, who says his logo is really to, going back to also the question that we have on maybe eating less meat. He says to eat less meat, but at least having it to be better quality, better animal health, and then also a better environment. So that's kind of his business case that he's making. And so here we see one of these practices definitely implemented. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Elisabeth. I think it's still a niche in Brandenburg. Yeah, I think the average pig producer there is a conventional, relatively large-scale farm. Niall, what's the role of organic in your case then?
Yeah, regenerative. Yeah, there wasn't actually interesting. There wasn't too much discussion around regenerative farming in the different workshops we've had with stakeholders. I think it's just a case of people within our case there, obviously the aim is to get more people into the organic system. And I think a lot of farmers have chosen organic because of certification. There's the whole process. Obviously, regenerative is newer. So it's, yeah, I think it's a case of maybe in the future, actually, there might be a bit of a competition, not the right word either, but like tension between the two, as some people choose the certificate with organic, and maybe they are directed that way rather than going through regenerative. But yeah, like I said, there wasn't actually much discussion of it in my case study.
Thank you very much, Niall. So with a view to time, we have already used up our allocated hour, and at the moment I can't see any more questions from the audience or in the chat. Oh, there is one more from Luma before we finish. Luma.
Hello, can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much also for the nice talks and the presentations. I think my question goes more towards to Elisabeth about the peak situation in Brandenburg, because I've noticed here in Germany in the last weeks, maybe there is growing discussions about the use of that numbers. I think it's in German is Haltungsform, to know like in the labels of the meat products. And there is the discussion about removing or postponing the use of it, or the obligation to use it. And do you? My question is like, do you think this has some impact on what you have studied about the pig situation and sustainability in the Brandenburg region, or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our case, there's big talk about the Tierhaltungskennzeichen, definitely.
Yes.
And in our region, I believe they still wanted to take it even a level further, to even in order to have this more quality label in the region in Brandenburg, perhaps to even go into a Tierhaltungskennzeichen minimum 3, because I think currently it's 2. And then in order to differentiate yourself from the imports that are currently much higher than what we can produce in Brandenburg, because yeah, like I said, it's declining. So yeah, this whole bringing it further to the EU level and having more standardized animal welfare, because this is really a big problem for producers here in Brandenburg, that it's yeah, often the ones coming from other standards, other countries do not have to adhere to the same sustainability levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Since I can't see any other hands up, I would like to hand back to Davide to wrap up this webinar, and maybe with one announcement or the other. Davide.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you again for all your questions. This webinar has been recorded and it will be available on the project website from tomorrow. So if you want to further share it, we will also share it on our social media, especially on LinkedIn. Thank you again, everybody, for the presentations, the interesting insights, and for your question and for attending the webinar. And yep, keep following us. We will have further webinars in the future and also an upcoming podcast series for the next year. So looking forward to that, and have a good day to everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.